Welcome. You're listening to Nuditea, a podcast where we get naked with our feelings while drinking tea. I'm Kimberly.
And I'm Wendy, and on this podcast we talk about life things, travel, food, womanly problems. Sometimes we have special guests, but today it's just the two of us. It's a conversation that the two of us have had often. Mainly one-sided. I usually just complain nonstop. But we'll get to that later.
But first,
we have to talk about the tea. I am today drinking an everyday detox organic lemon. Man, I've been having lemon teas, like either a combination of lemon ginger, lemon something, for the past 3 podcasts, I'm pretty sure.
I think you're doing tea right then.
Thank you.
But, are you detoxing?
I'm
because of yesterday.
Yes. So yesterday we had a brewery tour.
They called it Beer Buzz. We just went to a bunch of breweries in Guelph for a friend's birthday.
Yes, and it was absolutely delightful.
So fun.
Had lots of delicious beers, but now, look at my eyes, Kim. Look at this. Look at how red this eye is.
That one is more red than... I thought you were maybe being kind of
No, last night it was worse than this. And
yeah.
then I've been putting eye drops in, so I feel like I needed the detox.
Yeah.
And this says it's detox tea, so I'm gonna believe it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go to the garbage and get my
cool
thing
cool.
so I know what I'm drinking. So I got tea from the Grab box container. Mm-hmm. If you watched our previous episodes, we have a fancy tea container where we just have our mishmash of teas. So this one is a bag of our Snore in Peace herbal tea. It's okay. It's
all right.
It's fine. They say it's natural, fair, and delicious. It's very...
What is actually in here, though?
It doesn't have the list. I'm sure it was on the box before. It smells like peppermint for the most part, and just very like florally. You wanted to try.
It's got that some teas have like raspberry leaves and shit.
You think this has raspberry in it?
No, raspberry leaves. Yeah, some teas have like berry leaves in it. That's what it kind of reminds me of. Okay. It's like vaguely reminds you of peppermint, but it's also not pepperminty at all.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's a mystery. We'll just never know. We won't know. We lost the original packaging. We only have one left. Okay, so the topic for today is, I wanted to call it big city eating habits and small town living sadness, basically. But I feel like maybe that's just being dramatic as usual and
a little biased.
A little harsh.
Since I'm the opposite.
I will admit.
Opposite feeling.
That is maybe what I would have called this episode. But we're here to discuss our differing viewpoints. So I wanted to basically talk about how the environment in which we grew up in and how that influences our relationship with food and different types of food, ethnic foods, and where we're living now, which is quite a small-ish town.
From Wendy's perspective.
From my perspective, and our access to these home comforts in terms of food. So that's where this episode is headed. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in China. We are Chinese immigrants. I came to Canada when I was really young. Growing up at home, we only ate Chinese food exclusively. It was very rarely that we would have like a spaghetti day or like pasta is spaghetti. Spaghetti is a type of pasta. It felt to me when I was younger that we weren't assimilating at all, because I would go to my friends' houses and have dinner at their houses, and it would be very Western foods, European type foods. But being at home, being young, I was very, I don't know, kind of stressed out that I wasn't being exposed to more Western style foods, because we only ate Chinese food at home because that's all we knew how to cook. That's all my mom and my dad knew how to cook. And now my palate is strongly leaning towards Asian foods. And I love it. And I love the fact that I grew up eating so many foods that we would have eaten if we were still in China. And my exposure to Asian culture in terms of food has been pretty broad and pretty in-depth, I believe. So now, when I cook at home by myself, I'm not living with my parents anymore. I'm living with you.
Yes.
I still make Chinese food, and when I crave foods, they're usually things like pho or like Japanese ramen or like other Chinese home style dishes that I don't really have that much access to anymore.
Not the fast food fries. You don't crave those as much.
No,
in a while.
I do crave McDonald's soggy fries. My bae forever.
Which is crazy to me.
I'm sorry, soggy fries are delicious.
I know it's soggy fries.
Are delicious.
Crispy, and they cut the roof of your mouth, which you hate.
Nope. Crusty bread and crispy fries and chips, not my thing. I think now that I'm living in a small-ish town, big for Kim, small for me, because I did my undergrad in Toronto, which is quite a large city in Canada. Our current place of residence feels very, very rural to me. And it's not. Like, we've got two Walmarts, we've got, like, Metros and other, I don't know, we have, like, 15 pet stores. But, like, we have many, many amenities in this town.
And it continues to grow.
And people, I think the population here is getting more diverse as well.
Slowly. It's mainly still, like, university campus, which makes the population diverse once their students are gone for the summer.
It also makes most of the population.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. So, having been in Toronto and having access to literally everything, because Toronto has such a huge Asian community, and I lived right next to Chinatown when I was going to undergrad there. Mm-hmm. So I would literally just wake up in the morning, take my little old granny trolley, and like walk 5 steps down the street and be like, oh, here's all of the Chinese grocery stores and restaurants for all of my food needs. Mm-hmm. So I think I was a bit spoiled.
And I know you've struggled in particular the fact that Guelph doesn't have a very good Asian grocery store. You have to go to Kitchener or back to Toronto. Yep. There is a Himalayan grocery store downtown, but doesn't have the produce you want.
No, they have a lot of fun Asian things. Instant noodles, some random ingredients and spices, and those are all good. But I already have all of that. I shouldn't eat as many like instant noodle packs, like things like vegetables.
Your Instagram would say differently.
Listen, I went on a little bit of a binge, okay? Just let it go. Okay. Let it go. So they don't have any fresh produce. Yeah. They don't have any fresh meats, and there's like certain cuts of meats that I can't get from Western style grocery stores that I used to be able to get in Toronto from the Asian grocery store. Vegetables are a huge issue because I am a big fan of like broccoli and peppers and kale, but it's just not that homey feeling that
and you probably do that so much before you get sick of that. And you don't want to get sick of those things. So you have to mix it up every once in a while.
Exactly. And I think for me, because I grew up eating Asian vegetables, that's kind of my go-to. That's not something I get sick of very easily because those are flavors that my body is accustomed to. Whereas if I'm having like broccoli and bell peppers and that kind of thing a lot, my body kind of rejects it after a while. I'm like, I don't want to eat this anymore, which is unfortunate.
Do you think the grocery stores have, you were talking about cuts of meat. Is there any kind of cuts of meat you can get at a Metro or No Frills that you're a little surprised you can?
Yeah, actually, recently, No Frills has been carrying a wider selection of animal innards. So like chicken gizzards, liver, beef tripe, I think they always had. So I'm fairly surprised at those. The thing is though, why are they so expensive? Like first of all, not that many people are buying chicken gizzards and liver and beef tripe anyway, but they're priced so high in comparison to what I'm used to in Toronto in the Asian supermarket.
Well, it's probably because they don't think that there will be a lot of people buying it, but they still want that selection. And I think grocery stores, your classic chain stores like No Frills and Metro and Zehrs, they're trying to supply those interesting more cuts of meat because the community is kind of calling for it more and more now, except for they can't probably buy it in as big a bulk as an Asian grocery store. So they buy smaller because they still don't want to waste the food probably if it's not sold, and therefore it's more expensive at
And it probably says something about quality as well, because when you go to an Asian supermarket, you kind of buy foods under the assumption that you will have to get through this food within a week maximum, because it might not be the freshest produce, but it's definitely the cheapest and very easily accessible if you're in Toronto. I feel a little bit better now. I'm seeing more and more that Guelph is importing certain produce or certain cuts of meat that are better suited to Asian style cooking. But I think overall, I just really miss the convenience of having certain produce available to me.
So accessible,
Yeah. And I think it's just that feeling of being so close to everything, and having everything at your fingertips. And it wasn't like, oh, if I want to buy this one type of vegetable or this one seasoning or spice, I'd literally have to take a Greyhound out or like take an Uber or something. And you're right, Guelph does have 2, I think, Asian grocery stores. It used to have 3. One of them closed down. It was by the Goodwill. One of them is the Himalayan grocery store, which again does not have fresh produce. The other one apparently does have fresh produce, but it's super limited and also not fresh, and their variety, their selection isn't great. So I feel super depressed all of the time about this issue.
She basically can't wait to get out of Guelph after her PhD so she can just escape.
I mean, there are other reasons for that, but I think one of the big drivers for me looking into jobs in the future is that it has to be in a big city, because I feel like larger cities usually have more of these grocery stores because there's usually a larger Asian community there. So that's one of the things that I have put my foot down, basically.
Or do you throw out that whole, I got my PhD, and you corner the market on an Asian grocery store or restaurant in smaller communities?
Maybe. I mean, I don't have any of the qualifications. And people have said to me multiple times, they're like, Wendy, maybe you should start a grocery store. And I'm just like, yeah, but how?
Yeah.
With what money to start with? You're crazy.
100%. It's like getting the right suppliers. There's so much behind it all.
The startup money needed, I don't have that.
Which is probably why they open in the big cities.
Yeah.
Because they will be able to get that money back.
Yeah, exactly.
While you might struggle for a few years, maybe a decade, trying to get people, come to my store because these are foods you need.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, do you want to talk a bit about your background?
Sure.
So, your feelings about being here in this small ass town?
I grew up around the area of Napanee. For those of you who do not know where that is, a lot of you don't. It's between Belleville and Kingston. And if you still don't know those cities, it's between Toronto and Ottawa. It's it's very much in the middle of all of that. And I don't even live in Napanee. I live a little bit outside it. It borders Deseronto, Napanee, and Marysville. Very much a country family.
Basically the middle of nowhere.
It's not
close to some other also middle of nowhere towns.
Okay. If you
it's
have
a beautiful
hockey,
place.
if you have
I'm
hockey,
not hating
if you have hockey tournaments, you've probably been to Napanee. Also, it's just where you stop if you're traveling from Toronto to Ottawa. It's like that halfway in between. It's the greater part of Napanee is 17,000 people, which isn't as small as, Hanover.
That's small. That's actually larger than I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is like all the small little towns outside of it. But I grew up with, I've said it before, 6 siblings. There's 8 in our family. My father was a farmer, dairy farmer. My parents were pretty good financially with having this big family and how do they get by. My mother made majority of our meals, which looking back is fantastic. I'm really glad she did. We didn't eat out a lot. But with that being said, growing up in this small, very farm community, you have your classic farmers meals, which is some kind of starch, most likely a potato, whatever form that might take, your meat, and then vegetables. My mother was very good at having at least 3 different types of vegetables a meal, and sometimes only 2 if you didn't count potato. So we don't count potato. My mother was very strict on the fact that we had to eat at least 2 vegetables. And 1 not being potato.
Good on her.
Yeah, it was really, really good. We ate very healthy in that aspect. I did eat a lot of chips as a kid. Chips are addicting. And when we did go out, because it was like more of a special event, we still also had to be very financially aware. Yeah. So it would be, can we have a large orange crush and 6 little cups, please? And we didn't go crazy, but it was always a treat to kind of have these things. But of course, you're very down on maybe Guelph's variety and selection in the Asian cuisine in particular. You know, we like Napanee has their fast food areas. And then I think they've slowly got more chain restaurants out. Like Shoeless Joe's was the pub, bar, restaurant area you would go to. Like, for a really long time, it was like the only one. Now we have a Krabby Joe's, and their selection is very Western, what you would expect it to be.
Makes
so
sense.
you come to Guelph, we have, I think, good Thai food. Don't really know about the Chinese food in particular here. I don't hear like a lot of great things. We have like really good Indian cuisine here, I think. Again, I'm not an expert on any of this, and I think coming to Guelph, there's just way more selection from what I was
for sure
exposed to. There was also a time where I was off just living at home between high school and university, those 2 years.
Yeah.
And I decided I need to cook more. I need to like be prepared to take care of myself.
Yeah.
And I've obviously like helped my mom bake and cook throughout the years for holidays and stuff like that. But I took it upon myself. I want to do at least 1 meal a week, maybe a couple.
Yeah.
And I was also doing the grocery shop because take that off my mother's hands. So it's not my money, so I wasn't being frivolous, but I was like, let's buy some kale. There was just different things I was trying to get that we didn't necessarily eat a lot of the time. Yeah. And I think I was delving a little bit into different cuisines.
Yeah, different.
Even though I'm not an expert on making them, and they probably weren't great.
But
like I made us wonton soup a couple times, like, you know, pretty much from scratch, not the actual wrappers. But
no one wants to make the wrappers from scratch.
And that's not something we would necessarily make. And I also try to go vegetarian for some of our meals, which
bet your dad loved that.
My brother and my dad, they did a pretty good job with they ate it. Yeah. And the one miss I really had was portobello mushroom burgers. It was too soggy. I know how to fix that now. Okay. But they did a very good job just accepting and like being like, well, I did make them dinner, so they were good about it. But yes, there might have been a comment here and there that it would have been better if it had meat in it. So that's my experience of just growing up, having homemade food, and I definitely miss my mom's homemade food a lot of the time. I do think I can replicate it relatively well. Right. Once in a while. And then I'm also trying different things and using different ingredients that my mother hasn't. And my mom's gotten really good at, like, she loves doing kale now. She's got, like, grown Swiss chard in the backyard. Yeah. She does a better job, or she goes out of her comfort zone a little bit here and there.
That's good.
But
that's good. And I think a part of that is because the selection in grocery stores when we were super young in a small town was also not great. Kale only started booming into the market, several years ago?
So, avocados, too.
Yeah, avocados made a big hit. Actually, just like a few years back. Maybe when we were still in undergrad.
The selection we have. And I also have to remember, even back in our small town, like, our grocery store would have less selection. Exactly. Like the Guelph grocery store would have. Yeah. So they did what they could. And we also, as farmers, get your dairy, your milk from the cows, and also we had our own, like, garden and stuff like that throughout the spring and the summer. So, which you love.
That beautiful farm garden life.
Those tomatoes.
So, oh my gosh.
There's nothing like a
sun-ripened tomatoes from the garden, just picked fresh off the vine, and you just stuff your face. Oh, it's delicious. And I just realized while we were talking about this, my parents and I have been dealing with these same feelings for a long time now. I had a period of not having these feelings of being disappointed with grocery selections when I was living in Toronto. But prior to that, we lived in small towns the entire time. We lived in Hanover, which is a small place 2 hours out from Toronto. We would go to Toronto to go grocery shopping once in a while because that's how desperate we were.
You have to, like, freeze a lot of Would you get a lot and have to freeze a bunch?
No, we'd make pretty regular trips if that's what we wanted to do. We still got the majority of our groceries from like a Food Basics in the town, but it's just not the same. Like it always feels like a much bigger deal. We're all a lot happier when we have produce that's Asian
2
vegetables.
hours to get that. That's a lot.
A 2-hour drive. And after we moved from Hanover to the U.S.
How was Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania, the place we were living is also quite small. We have like a Walmart and everyone shops for produce at Walmart there. We still had to drive about an hour, sometimes a bit more if there was traffic, just to go to the Strip District in Pittsburgh, and there were like a cluster of Chinese grocery stores there. And the Asian community in Pittsburgh is like very well hidden. They don't come out to play very often, but the Strip District was one place where you saw all of the Asians come out. So this whole time, since we moved to Canada basically, except for the short periods of time when we were in the GTA, we've been constantly dealing with, okay, well, we don't have access to this kind of produce, so how do we make do with like not lesser meals, but I think just not as fulfilling, not as satisfying.
Not gonna be as happy eating it.
Yeah, not as home comfort feels. That's a recurring theme here. Home comforts. Yeah.
And I think I'm okay with not always having that home comfort, because I don't make a lot of what my mom made. I do and I don't. I do ask her for recipes. There's a lot of baking stuff I ask from her.
Sweets and baking, I think.
But I know how to make kind of the classic farmer's meal. Like, I don't need that all the time, and I think living in Guelph has allowed me to be like, oh, I'll do this, and I find that in the grocery stores, I'm like, oh, I can get this and this, and try some things. At the same time, though, I am only feeding myself, and I don't want to do food waste, so I do end up buying just a lot of the same things, because I know I'll get through it, I know I like it, so I do sometimes find I'm in this kind of repetitive cycle, and I try to introduce I go for different vegetables every once in a while, but if I don't have that selection as well, then it's like...
You there's other options, I think, for you to...
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm more okay with, like, oh, I'm stuck with broccoli, or I'm stuck with kale.
Yeah, and I do go through periods where I'm craving food flavors that are not so Asian, so I'll go through, like, I had couscous a couple of weeks ago, and I just made a gigantic batch, but that's the thing, like, once I got to the end of that meal prep, I was so sick of those flavors, like the rosemary-ish and the balsamic.
Isn't that the problem with food prep, though? It's great.
But that's the thing. I don't feel that when I prepare Asian foods. Okay. So I can prepare the same amount of food that will carry me through, I don't know, like 3 to 5 days. And if it's Asian food, I'll go through and I'll be like, yep, time to food prep again. But if it was like my couscous meal, the first couple of days I'll be like, oh yeah, this is great. I really wanted some couscous. But then after eating it for a couple of meals, I really don't want to be eating it anymore. So it's kind of a struggle to get through. So
yeah, I don't meal prep because I get sick of anything after a while. I don't think it matters if it's my home comforts or it's a different cuisine. That's why I make like enough for maybe 2 or 3 meals. And I do spend a lot of time like cooking, having to do that again and again, or I just don't eat, as you know.
Yep.
I get too lazy and I'm all like,
yeah, I think
bagel it is.
I think that's part of the reason I meal prep as well, because I often also feel too lazy. Like, we come back from work and we just want to not have to do anything, basically. We just want time to not have to be standing and like thinking and doing things with our hands or minds. So those are I think that's the huge reason why I meal prep, because I am not like you. I can't just go out there and starve for a night because you're like, oh, whatever, I'll just skip this meal, it's no big deal. No, I will be so grumpy and I will probably not be able to sleep. So I need to have food around. It has to be Asian food, apparently, or else I get sick of it.
I was wondering, do you think back in China, as a Westerner, would I be able to find a wide selection of food that I like, or would be like my home comfort food? Would I struggle like you struggle with just this limited selection, or just things I'm not used to? Do you think they have those?
Like, if we're thinking back to the basic like farmer's meal, if you wanted to have potatoes and then like a meat of some sort and then have multiple vegetables on the side, I honestly don't think you would have trouble finding those. I think preparation wise, if you're home cooking it, you have that choice. You buy the produce and bring it home, you prepare it however you want. I think the struggle would be if you're not used to cooking and eating Chinese style vegetables. I think that would be a bit of a struggle for some people. I know you're a bit more adventurous with your food, so I feel like maybe you'd be okay, but it's not like you can go to any normal Asian supermarket and there will be kale and broccoli and cauliflower. There are grocery stores that definitely carry those things, and they might be a little bit more expensive because that's not really the market for them.
Yeah.
I don't know if China grows those vegetables for its own population. Maybe they do and it's mainly exported, but because it's seen as kind of like a Western style food, they mark up the price a little bit. Maybe the spices, I would say Chinese spices are very different from the spices that Westerners typically use to cook with. So that might be an issue if you really wanted like something heavy on fresh rosemary or like baking a fish with some thyme. You might not be able to find like fresh sprigs of thyme around the grocery store. That might be something that's not available. So maybe like it's the flavors, right? It's not necessarily the produce that I think Westerners might struggle with in China. Is probably more the depth and flavor that would be missing a little bit.
Could I get a good pizza? Could I find a place that would produce a good pizza?
I think you could, because China, since society in China is moving forward pretty rapidly and people are starting to experiment more, and also the doors have been open in China and people are much more aware of what things are like in other societies. So originally, pizza in China would have been very bastardized. Like it would have not looked or tasted like pizza to you. It would have been a round flatbread with a variety of ingredients that don't typically go on pizzas. But now I think
I put anything on pizza.
That's true. We're not very picky with our pizza ingredients, but things just straight like raisins or like I guess we've put apple on pizzas. So
I'm more open to putting anything and everything on it now and just trying things out.
Pizza ASMR video coming up soon. It's on my to-do list.
Yes.
I think going to China now as a Westerner, it would be a lot better. And there's a lot of Western style restaurants in China now as well, because that's
not just like chain fast food, but like
no, like I would say they're probably higher end because they're catering to richer Chinese people who are like, let's go get some xi can, which in Chinese literally translates to Western cuisine. So it's definitely not something that the average Chinese family is going out for. So everyone in China is definitely still just cooking their Chinese food at home. If a Westerner were to go to China, I think they would have access to many of the same things
in the big cities, but they would probably still have a struggle. If you were in a small town,
oh my goodness.
Like, well,
in a small town, you'd have so much produce. You'd have the same amount of produce, but I think you would definitely not be able to find like a good cauliflower. I haven't lived in China in so long, so maybe things have changed a lot now. Maybe you can just buy anything everywhere. China's delivery system is also pretty crazy, so there's a chance that you can just like call up an order of something online and it'll just get delivered to you. I wanted to go through really quickly some foods that I miss a lot.
Sure.
Do you have any of those? Like, do you have some home cooked meals that you miss?
It's probably mainly what my mom bakes.
And
that's just because I don't get around to baking all that much, or I don't want to be eating a lot of like sweets.
Yeah.
And I eat lots of carbs, so the carb thing isn't an issue, I guess. And I think I do a decent pie. My mom makes really great apple pie. My friends in high school used to call it the magic oven, because like she'd get cookies just right, like the pie, like it's not too watery. It's just the perfect amount of like cooked. And so my mom has a magic touch when it comes to baking, and it's probably because she uses a shit ton of butter and sugar. My goodness. Our spaghetti, I'm not a huge fan of spaghetti. Spaghetti can just go die. But you can cut that out if you want.
I mean, it's just your opinion, so we're going to leave it in, but like, wow.
A lot of spaghetti sauces probably don't have as much sugar as my mom's did growing up. For sure.
I mean, that makes sugar and salt generally make all food taste a lot better. So maybe
butter, salt, sugar. It's
a magic combo.
It's a lot. I don't think I realized how much it was until I literally was watching my mom when I was older one day making her sauce. And I was like, oh my goodness.
It's basically...
Maybe I'm exaggerating in my mind now.
It's a jam. It's a tomato jam.
Yes. I think, it's a lot of the baking. Because I think I can replicate a lot of what my mom made. However, we'd get it more frequent because she's a champ and can make meals, and it's more or less things that I just think are too time consuming. I'd never attempt.
I think that actually relates to my list of home foods that I miss the most.
Time consuming ones?
Time consuming, and also the aspect of family comes into play, because my list, I had 3 things on my list. One is something called 粽子, which is a sticky rice with meat and beans and sometimes like peanuts and other things wrapped in banana leaf and then cooked until it's ready. So it's just like a lovely, satisfying, carby and savory meal, but it's not something that you can easily accomplish on your own. Like, there are so many steps. You have to start prepping the day before. Everything needs to be soaked and seasoned, and the banana leaves need to be washed and cooked. And then the next day you go through this whole process of, like, first of all, waterproofing your entire counter, because that shit just gets everywhere because everything's been soaked in water. So you have to wrap it, you have to like bind all of these little packages of sticky rice, and that takes forever, and your hands are like destroyed after from the twine.
And for the listeners, Wendy puts a lot of time into what she makes. So when she says this thing is time consuming and too much for her, it's probably too much for the normal average human being.
It's just mentally and physically exhausting, because you have to take into account the amounts. You don't want like too much of one ingredient left over, because what do you do with it after? You literally prep this ingredient to make 粽子. So that's something that my dad and I used to still make every year around Christmas time when I go home. So around New Year's we usually start prepping for this, and that's a lovely, lovely family bonding time. We also roped my mom into it, my partner into it, and it's just like a lovely moment. And it's the same with dumplings, which is also on my list. I make dumplings quite often here on my own.
She sells them too.
And I also sell them.
Hit up her Instagram, her DMs.
I do have many dozens of beef and daikon dumplings in our freezer right now, so call me up if you want some. So these dumplings are not some things that I miss, as in I can never have them. I have them all the time, but the act of prepping the process and wrapping all the filling with the dumpling wrappers together as a family, that's something I really miss. And along the same lines, it's very family oriented, I guess, Chinese food culture. But we have something called lao mian, which is kind of basically just a noodle, and you have this thick sauce that's on the side. It can be like a meat sauce, it can be egg based. Basically, it can be any kind of sauce you want, and then you pour it on top of cooked noodles, and then you mix the noodles up. It's kind of like Chinese spaghetti or like Japanese ramen, where you can pour some sauce on. Whatever, it's not important. But that's kind of like the meal where, why would I make one portion of this type of sauce? Because what would I put in it? Like, I need like a quarter pound of meat, and then maybe like half a tomato, and like that's just not how ingredients come. And then that's also not something you can meal prep very well, because noodles just bloat and it's not great. So I think part of my missing home style cooking is also the family aspect of it. Yeah. I would like you to try the 粽子 sometime. Maybe I should have a day where we make it and see what happens. ASMR, just the entire process. All right, good chats. That was us talking about some of our feelings living where we're living and having grown up where we grew up, eating the foods that we ate.
Do you think
what a summary.
Do you think you're a little dramatic about how little Guelph has?
I'm very dramatic. You know how hangry I get? I think this is another form of hangry. It's like crangry. Like, I'm craving it, but I can't have it, so I'm angry about it.
That word will catch on for
crangry.
sure.
Okay, so easy to say.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Nudity. You can listen to us on PodBean.com, iTunes, Apple Podcasts. iTunes is leaving.
Oh, yeah.
They're just, yeah.
Yeah, saw that.
So Apple Podcast and probably other areas that I don't know. Just look wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check us out at Nudity Podcast. You can also see the video edits that Wendy does and is slowly always growing her talent in doing.
You know, sometimes I slack off though. Sometimes I'm like, this topic does not require me to edit a lot.
You show restraint, and that's good. You can find that on YouTube at our channel at Nudity Podcast. And then you can also follow us on Instagram at Nudity Podcast.
We have a Gmail account, but who's emailing us? Okay, bye!
Bye!